Magnetize your minis, flight stands, custom kits, and all the hobby supplies you'll need from themagnetbaron.com.
Hello and welcome to the YouTube channel for Craftworld Eldar.com. I'm Brent, and in this video I'm going to be talking about how 3 recent updates to the game have affected Craftworld Eldar. Now, those 3 updates are the new chapter approved that drops this weekend, the updated point costs that appeared earlier in the week, and the new Balance Dataslate. For now, I'm just going to give you the facts with some commentary on how popular units and tactics are likely to be affected. Next week, I will put out a new video with suggestions about how to rethink secondary objectives and army construction once we all actually have chapter-approved Warzone Nephilim in our hands. The overall takeaway is this. I think that the new chapter-approved rules are likely to be good for the game overall. They lower the barrier to entry for new players and rein in some powerful turn 1 combos from a variety of factions. That said, in combination with the new point values and the new data slate, the effect on Space Elves is pretty brutal. Craftworld Eldar have pretty much had their wrists handcuffed to their ankles and been thrown down a flight of concrete stairs. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not like Craftworlds are bad now, and frankly, if you're just playing them casually with 5 or 6 other friends at your LGS, these changes are unlikely to significantly impact your play experience or your win rate. On the tournament scene, however, Craftworlds have definitely been smacked down a grade or 2. I guess the good news is this. Now when we show up to tournament tables, opponents will no longer say things like, "Oh, Eldar, big surprise," as though we were only running them because we are meta chasers of low moral character. And as someone who was taking Craftworlds to tournaments even when they were dumpster tier, I found these comments especially irritating these last few months. Look, I wanted to say, I was playing Space Elves competitively even when they were the tragic wallflowers of 40k, huddled over by the punch bowl with the band nerds and Tau, while all of the cool kids danced with factions that actually won GTs, at least occasionally. But nobody wants to hear that. At least now, our opponents won't suspect us of factional promiscuity and crowd following. So there's that. I actually think it's fun to be running a faction that isn't one of like the 2 or 3 favorites for winning tournaments. It's more gratifying. And let's be clear, Craftworlds are still a solid army and lots of fun to play. I'm just not sure we will routinely see them in the finals at GTs anymore. I think they've definitely been dressed down. Okay, without further ado, here is the bad news in a nutshell. I will talk about each of these in more detail later in the video. Thing number 1. 2 of the most competitive go-to secondary missions for Craftworlds no longer exist and have not been replaced with anything comparable. Thing 2. New CP restrictions significantly hamper how Azuryani list construction works, combos, trickery. We rely a lot on CP, and that has been hamstrung. Thing number 3. Approximately 50% of Craftworlds units in the Codex got a points hike. Often it's not a big one, but nevertheless, your list is probably 50 to 80 points more expensive, the one you've been running. Thing number 4, Hail of Doom is now a singleton trait. So if you take Hail of Doom as a custom Craftworld option, you may not take anything else. No more tricky combos with Masterful Shots or Children of Prophecy or whatever. Thing number 5, Eldritch Storm has been quadruple nerfed into something that not even a band nerd would date. Thing number 6, Fire and Fade is now allowed only once per game. Thing number 7, Matchless Agility no longer guarantees a 6-inch battle focus move. Instead, it just lets you reroll the die. Ouch. There is a little bit of good news. We weren't the only faction to get smacked around like a Gretchen and an all-orc frat party. Tyranids, for example, got hit even harder. We definitely received a bigger smackdown than the vast majority of factions, but everybody was affected. Some people were affected positively. Everybody was affected, and other people got hit too. The Hidden Path secondary is better than it was before. And when I do my video next week on how we need to rethink secondary objectives, I will talk about this. Players can now take multiple faction-specific secondaries. This is kind of inert news for Craftworld. It probably should not go in the good news column. It should probably go in the bad news column, because we don't have great faction-specific secondaries, and other factions do. So the ability to take multiple faction-specific secondary objectives is probably bad for us overall, but it's a thing. We have more options. Lastly, the new CP and secondary rules, they're going to be more friendly to new players, and I'm going to call this good news for Craftworld's players just because it's good news for the game. Maybe it'll make it easier for people to get into 40K, more people to play with. When I'm teaching new people how to play, I find that they can handle everything right up until you say, okay, and now your secondary objectives, and then their heads explode. And so usually you have to play your first couple of games without those. And having that be easier is probably good. And when I do my video next week, I'll go into some detail about that. Okay, let's go into details concerning changes. So I mentioned secondary missions are different. Stranglehold and To the Last are gone. Not just gone for us, they're gone for everybody. But this means that competitive lists that were relying on Bahareth and 10 Swooping Hawks to guarantee scoring for To the Last are a thing of the past. I was having a lot of success with this. I'm sure you were too. Like most of the changes, objectively and in a vacuum, I'm cool with this. To the Last in particular, when we had units, any army with units that were just very difficult to eliminate and expensive, it was kind of a low skill, easy points grab. The only reason that I'm not 100% on board with this as a change is that there are still faction-specific secondaries like that available to other armies, and those scoring options are similarly broken, and now we don't have one that is equivalent, and that's a little bit of a bummer. I suspect actually that the new metric for separating the sheep from the goats in competitive viability tournament play will be whether a particular army has access to 2 easy and reliable faction-specific secondaries. Craftworlds do not, and I think armies that do, those are going to be the ones now that dominate the top tables at GTs, which is fine. Honestly, I think the changes to secondary missions are probably the single most significant change in how Craftworlds will play and their potential for scoring and just how the game will be played. That is a super deep rabbit hole. So I'm not going to talk about it anymore in this video, except to say that we probably all will be leaning into hidden path plus other things in the majority of our games, which will mean seriously rethinking list construction. And again, I will do a long video on that next week. Okay, next thing. So the CP that players start with has been halved. Players now in a 2,000 point game start with 6 command points. Also, relics and warlord traits are no longer free. They each cost a CP. You can then spend additional CP to get additional ones using those faction-specific stratagems. But even those first 2 that had been free, we pay for those now. To balance this, the rules writers have decreed that players now generate a CP in both their own command phase and their opponent's command phase. So this means that if you take a relic and a warlord trait, you're technically down only 1 CP over the course of the whole game, because it used to be that you started with 12 and you got the free relic and the warlord trait and you would generate 5 over the course of the game. Now, if you do the math, you're 1 down. But in practice, it's a huge change. It's not just like a 1 CP change, because if you were to run a list with, say, a battalion, a vanguard detachment, a relic and a warlord trait, you would start the game with only 1 CP, and that's presuming that you put nothing in the webway, nothing in reserve, didn't take Seer Council, didn't take Relics of the Shrines. If you do even one of those, you have no command points, and you couldn't max out something like Webway Strike. This means no turn 1 Phantasm, so no Phantasm, no early game Eldritch Storm, although that power is totally dead now for other reasons. No Fire and Fate. You see where this goes, I think. Tactical options for Craftworlds players in the first 2 turns of the game are severely diminished. Again, technically this is true for everybody, but it hits us especially hard because we have a lot of tricky stuff that relies on CP. Alternatively, you could retain access to some of those tricks, but only run a single battalion with only a single pregame upgrade. So maybe you take Seer Council. As a result, the relative value of various units in the Codex has shifted considerably. Autarchs are much worse because they generally require both a warlord and a relic to be decent. while Phoenix Lords are much better because they have those things built in, although they did get a points hike, so there's that to consider. Most Phoenix Lords went up 10 points, but Autarchs went up 5, so Phoenix Lords are probably still a better investment. Striking Scorpions are much worse than they were before because they need Phantasm ready and waiting to be viable. And now it's much harder to make room for Phantasm. So there's essentially just a tax, a CP tax for taking Scorpions. While MSU units, all of those minimum-sized units, are better because big units are subject to morale tests, and now you probably don't have any points for Insane Bravery early in the game. So big units worse, small units better. But Horrify and Will of Azurian better, because the ability to force your opponent to take morale tests is much more effective in a CP-starved economy. Will of Azurian, which makes you immune, is suddenly even better, and so on, right? So all of the stuff in the Codex has, well, not all of it, but much of it, maybe even most of it, its relative value has altered. Seer of the Shifting Vector, the Warlord trait, which I said used to be an auto-include, pay a CP for it, now because people are spending less CP, especially early on, is probably a total trap. It's probably not worth it at all. Whereas Fateful Divergence, the psychic power that lets you generate a CP with an easy psychic test, is really good and is probably verging on being an auto-include. So just the relative value of stuff has shifted. And what's frustrating about this is that it seems like the effects have not been accounted for in the new point values. I kind of feel like the point values were worked out separately from the chapter approved changes and Warzone Nephilim. I think they're consistent with the Balance Dataslate a little bit, but not with the new chapter approved. And this has created... I think that the game that has resulted is has not been totally considered. It's going to take some time to figure out who the real winners and losers are among the data sheets now that this shakeup has happened. Although I'm sure probably all of us have opinions already. Some of you out there are saying, Brent, no, it's obvious, it's this. I have opinions too, but I do think that we need to table test a lot of this stuff to work out who the real winners and losers are. Except in some places it is fairly obvious. And we will talk about some of this. Okay, let's talk points changes. Some of these are totally understandable. Others are completely baffling. Little here is earth-shattering, and again, without the context of the other changes, they really wouldn't be a big deal. My own lists went up, I think, 60 to 80 points in most cases. I could have worked around that, but in concert with those other changes, I think we're building a totally new list. Every Phoenix Lord went up 10 points, except for Bahareth, who went up 20. The increase to Bahareth was understandable in the To the Last meta. Without To the Last, I think a 10-point increase would have been fine. And it doesn't make any sense to increase Fugan. He's not very good for a variety of reasons, but they broad brushstroked it. Everybody went up 10, Bahareth went up 20. The Avatar went up 10 points, despite probably already being 20 points overcosted. This one is frustrating and baffling. The new model is beautiful. We all want to be using it, and it was already really hard to use it against skilled opponents. Again, as an overall percentage of its cost, is 10 points huge? No, it's already wildly expensive already, but it's just annoying because it seems ill-considered. Every other unnamed character went up 5 points, even those struggling foot autarchs who nobody was running and now come with a 2 CP tax if they want a relic and a warlord trait, which they kind of need. They increased Farseer's 5 points too, and if you were running 3, there's now a 15-point tax on your list, which in a world where we still had Eldritch Storm kind of makes sense. But now that they've taken Eldritch Storm away from us, I'm not really sure why we also needed the tax on Farseers. But again, 5 points a character model. It's not that crazy. Eldred and Illic Nightspear were both left alone. Good. Aspect Warriors went up a bit. Hawks and Spiders are up 2 points each. Avengers, Banshees, Scorpions, and Dragons are all up 1 point each. While the Exarch Power Stand Firm and the Exarch Power Heartstrike each got a 5-point bump. Okay, fine. If it weren't for all the other changes, this would be pretty trivial. Fire Prisms are up 5 points, which is not a lot, but they were already a bit marginal. Vectored Engines went from 10 points to 20 points, and combined with the CP Strangulation that we're now seeing, and the nerf to fire and fade, so you can only use it once a game and it's 2 CP, and we already don't really have CP. Prisms are now totally out of the running for competitive play, and this one makes me sad because they were already kind of a marginal pick, but they had potential as in sort of clever off-meta lists, and I kind of feel like what happened here is they thought we might pivot to that, and so they shut them down hard. You can still run them, but there isn't, if you're going to run them in a clever way that makes them viable, they've kind of taxed that out of what is off of the table. They've taxed it off of the table in serious competitive play. Falcons and Wave Serpents each got a 5-point bump. That's fine. But Crimson Hunters and Hemlocks also each got a 5-point bump, which is weird given that neither has appeared in any competitive list that did well in any GT any time in 9th edition. So why they felt they needed to raise the price of the flyers, I don't know. Similarly, the Yanari, which we're seeing almost no competitive play at all, the 3 Yanari characters all got point hikes. So the 2 infantry models got 5 points, and the Yinkarn went up 10. I guess it has to keep up with the Avatar, but again, we weren't really seeing them on the table, so that seems a little bit brutal. But the good news is that our 2 most efficiently pointed units, the Warwalkers and the Vipers, have been left completely alone. I assume that this restraint is due to the nerf to Hail of Doom, and I am imagining people at GW, rules writers, like some fierce debate where somebody's saying, no, you've already taken Hail of Doom down a peg, you must leave these units alone. And thank you to whomever that was, because I think that's right. I do think, though, that post-point changes, the Warwalkers and the Vipers will be 2 of our most popular units going forward. Also true of Wind Riders, and I think Shining Spears. Again, these models were already good, and they've been left alone. Shining Spears in particular, I think we'll see more play as people try to make Wrath of Cain work, now that we don't have as many secondary options. And Shining Spears are great candidates for Wrath of Cain. I'll talk about that in my video next week when I talk about new list construction ideas and secondary scoring. All right. Balance Dataslate changes. The Balance Dataslate is where they nerf your things. Occasionally they make them better. Usually they nerf them. I already mentioned that Hail of Doom is now a singleton custom Craftworlds choice. It's very good. I get it. It was either going to be that or they were going to take it down a peg. I kind of suspected maybe 6s would auto wound but not count as 6s to wound. And it's probably better that they did it this way. But it's going to struggle a lot more into Armor of Contempt. So if there's a lot of Armor of Contempt in the tournament meta, you can no longer take masterful shots, and that's going to make Hail a lot harder to use effectively against those armies. And those of us that were looking for other interesting combos using things like Children of Prophecy can no longer be clever in that way and make Psychic Cast reliable. And now, because of the new CP restrictions, trying to balance that out by taking Seer Council is harder. I still think Hail of Doom is good. I think it'll still see competitive play, largely because the units that make use of it were untouched. Dire Avengers went up a point, but otherwise not really. But it does come as a blow, right? On the other hand, if they hadn't nerfed Hail, if they had left it alone entirely, it would now just be the obvious right choice for all serious competitive play. And now that the whole faction is pretty much a B-list army, I think, there are lots of equally good options. And so, and I like that. I like that there isn't one right way to play Space Elves. So I guess it's fine that it got nerfed, but it is fine. It is fine that it got nerfed. It is, but nevertheless, I think the one downside to the nerf on Hail of Doom is there's just less room to be clever with that build, and I as an Eldar player, I like the opportunity to be clever, and so it's a little bit sad. Okay, Eldritch Storm. Eldritch Storm got a makeover. If you imagine a makeover where makeup is lava and the accompanying glass of champagne is in fact hemlock tea. They just beat the hell out of it. It's laughable. It's like they came up with 4 ways to rein it in, and then they were like, no, just do all 4. So the first limiting factor, if you didn't even change the power, just the mere fact that it's a CP strangled economy now, and you're starting the game probably with like 1 or 2, 3 if you're lucky, it was already really hard to use it. So there's that limitation. And then on top of that, they've totally rewritten the power. So here's how it works now. And some people read this and they don't realize quite how bad it is. They're misinterpreting it. So in your command phase, you do that thing you did before where you put down a marker 24 inches from a farseer. Putting down the marker does not require a line of sight. But now that marker doesn't actually do anything if you don't empower it. If you empower it with at least one farseer, then immediately the power will trigger, but you can't empower it multiple times. It says that you can attempt to empower it any number of times, but as soon as you succeed once, you do the thing and you pick up the marker. Instead of now doing D3 mortal wounds plus 1 for each time it's empowered, if you successfully empower it once, it does D3 mortal wounds to units within a 6-inch bubble, but only if you successfully roll a 4-up for each unit. It used to be a 4-up for characters and a 2-up for other things. So, and in order to empower it, you need line of sight. So now you can only empower it once. Empowering it does not cause it to do D3 plus 1. It just causes it to do D3. You can never do more than that. And now instead of hitting on a 2-up with most units, it only hits on a 4-up, and you need the line of sight, which means exposing a farseer. There are 4 different nerfs at work here. If you want to use this, you put down the marker, you move a farseer into line of sight, and then you quicken it away again. This is hysterically over the top. Here's the other thing. When you empower Eldritch Storm, it also shuts down your ability to cast other powers. So there were already these sort of built-in trade-offs. I really liked how they also left it at 3 CP. Like, if this were now 1 CP and once per game, you wouldn't even have to make it once per game, honestly. If it were 1 CP in the new CP starved economy, it might make sense to sometimes consider. At 3 CP, it really is just laughable. I really liked how flavorful Eldritch Storm was before. It felt very Eldar. You needed, in order to make it work, you had to really plan for it. There were a bunch of moving parts. If you empowered it with 3 farseers, none of those farseers could cast except the one that spent 1 CP to cast 1 power. There really was, I think, a pretty well-balanced trade-off there. It was a high skill cap power, but on the other hand, it created a big opportunity for feel-bad moments for opponents. And I think especially opponents that were new to competitive play, I always, in games, explain to people what it was, how it worked before the game started, because just doing that to somebody and having them not know is kind of bullshit. And if they don't know that they need to plan for countering it, that can create pretty bad feelings at the table. And so I think one of the reasons to not have the power is it requires everybody to be just incredibly virtuous at the table in order for it not to result in bad feelings. And otherwise, it's a terrible gotcha power. And so I get it. I get why they reined this one in. I think that with the new CP limitations, it wasn't actually broken, but it might be better for the game if less scrupulous players can't gotcha newer people with it, or people who are just unfamiliar with Eldar. So I get it, but I'm a little sad about it. Okay, last data sleep changes. So Matchless Agility and Fire and Fade both got taken down a peg. Fire and Fade is now once per game. I don't think it was 2 CP, and we're all CP starved now. I just don't think that was necessary. Matchless Agility, instead of guaranteeing a 6-inch battle focus move, now just lets you re-roll the die. Again, like with the nerfs to Eldritch Storm, what I don't like about this is it removes an opportunity for clever play. I feel like they took the competitive ceiling for Eldar for cleverness down a bit with these changes. I don't like that. I like that they were historically a high skill cap army. So it just seems pretty heavy-handed. I don't think these changes were necessary. Here's one upside. Beltan is now more appealing because we can't. So Beltan, there are 2 things for Beltan that are really good. One is your battle focus moves are always at least 3 inches, and the other one is you get to reroll a hit die. Now, the 3-inch battle focus thing would have been more tempting if all of us couldn't use Matchless Agility to cheat into a better version of that every round with at least 1 unit. And now that we can't do that, I think Build 10 is a little bit more appealing. Build 10 will also be more attractive to people who are trying to run Wrath of Cain, because it's a good faction for Aspect Warriors. And as I said, I think we're going to see people trying to make use of that. I still think that one is, in many matchups, a little bit of a trap. I'll talk about that in my video next week, but I think a lot of people are certainly going to be trying to perfect it in competitive play. And I'm happy to see more Build 10 on the table. I have always found their fluff delightful, and so more Space Elf Imperialists storming the battlefields of the 41st millennium sounds pretty good to me. Okay. So that's really it. That's everything that you need to know about the changes to Craftworld Eldar. And my apologies, truly, if the video seemed a little bit on the gloomy side. I am generally committed to keeping my content GW and Space Elf positive. As I said at the beginning of the video, I still think Craftworlds are a really solid army. We have strong data sheets and a deep codex. It's fine. This stuff really only matters at the higher level of competitive play. And it's only there that I think we're going to see Space Elves stumbling. I think, again, at your local game store, unless it's a pretty high level of competitive play at your local game store, I don't think it's going to hit you that hard. I'm only a little bit salty about this because, again, it feels like some of the changes were considered in a vacuum, not in the context of all of the other changes that were happening. So that feels a little bit, but nevertheless, we'll be fine. I promise to be back next week with salt-free suggestions as to how to rethink secondary objectives and army construction. Part of the fun of 40K is constantly strategizing about how to approach new tactical puzzles, and rules updates do help to keep the game fresh and dynamic. And so I'm sure that I will do a lot of daydreaming this week about how I'm going to make changes to my lists, and that's one of the more fun aspects of 40K. So that's what I've got. Thank you for taking the time to watch the video. If you've not already subscribed, I hope that you will consider subscribing. If you have not clicked like, I hope that you will click like. If you would like to consider becoming a Patreon, I will link my website in the video description. If I get a few more of those people, I might start a Discord. And usually Patreons get early access to videos. This one was an exception because it's very time sensitive. Hello, Patreons. Thank you very much for your support. I'm a big fan of all of you. All right. Thanks. Back again soon. Good luck in your next campaign. And I look forward to seeing you all again in the near future. Take care. Bye.